Okay, welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind Podcast. Today I'm joined by Henry Habib, but you also go by another name on LinkedIn, so maybe you can clarify that
Sure.
when you do a bit of an intro. But welcome on, Henry. Thanks for joining me today, and really good to get you on the podcast to talk about a whole range of your expertise, particularly in sort of the Power Platform, and also some real, talk about some real world experience about how you're actually, seeing these used out there in businesses in your current role. But also, just maybe we can also, you're also very well known in the sort of Udemy and training community with some of your content. So just talking through your journey there and how that's going as well, I think would be really interesting for our listeners. So why don't I throw to you? You just maybe expand a bit more about yourself, and then we can kick things off.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Hello, everyone. My name is Henry Habib. I go by Henry online. My full name is Hassanein Habib Nayani, but it's a very long and complex name, and I prefer to go with Henry here. As Sam mentioned, quite a few different roles. Love to teach online with Udemy. Love to do a lot of the other project related work as well. But just starting from the very top, graduated with a degree in accounting and finance, actually. From the University of Waterloo. I'm based out of Canada, didn't really enjoy that much, and kind of found my footing in consulting. And I was the type of person who wasn't really a developer to start, didn't have any formal training in it, nothing like that. But I knew data analytics and data science is where I wanted to be. At that time, I remember this article that said data scientist is going to be the sexiest job. And I think it was a Harvard article too that said that. So I wanted to go into that no matter what, even if I didn't have that type of background. So I joined a top consulting firm right out of undergrad. This kind of consulting firm is very general. Think, McKinsey, Bain, BCG type, no real sort of mandate, but to kind of help companies, with their problems. So I worked on a wide variety of different industries and different practices. And again, the data science and data analytics one is where I really fell in love. So that's where I started to specialize in. Nowadays, the projects I focus on are, really twofold. One is working with retailers actually to kind of come up with insights from their data. Retailers have a very good position where they have lots of data coming in. The volume is massive. I mean, I'm talking about terabytes of data per day, not only just the sales, but they also now are collecting data, for example, in terms of what aisles you go in, what you pick up, what you drop off using their cameras. So being able to take all of that and turn it into insights that people can actually action from that. So that's one thing. The other thing is really looking at processes that retailers follow in their internal headquarter organization and seeing how that can be better. For example, a lot of the work that I focus on right now actually is looking at the process that people follow to determine what promotions should actually go online. So should we promote this bag of chips or should we promote this Kit Kat bar instead? And looking at how we can actually use data to do it. You'd be surprised as to those decisions right now are not as data focused as they could be. It's more so based on the opinion of the highest person paid in the room. So we're trying to kind of look at bring data into that decision as well. So that's me with my day job. As I was doing all of these, I've used the Power Platform all the time at work. We use Power BI a lot. We use Power Automate a lot to help them do these kinds of things. There's a general trend in the industry of, becoming no code or low code. So a lot of the things that only seasoned developers could do at the time now can be done by mostly anyone. And you need those seasoned developers still to do certain things. But I feel like more than 85% of the things that, you want to do with data, you can actually do without writing a single line of code. So there's a trend that's going to keep going. It's going to go from 85 to 90 to 95. There'll always be a tail, obviously, that where you can't touch no code with, but that's what it's going to go through. And I did a lot of training in my career where when you actually do these engagements, you then have to train people at those companies to kind of use these tools. So then I thought, why don't I video these and kind of publish them on Udemy and other content? So I started doing that and got a good following that way. Nowadays, I still have a day job. I still do consulting, but I'm looking more and more to get into that kind of teaching space. Because, I love learning new things. I love try to get involved with the newest thing that's out there. And B, just the response I've seen from people who want to learn this, and the community has been awesome. I've been able to use that to connect to Enterprise DNA, for example, and a lot of other types of content providers as well. Yes, that's a little bit about me in terms of how I got here and what I do.
That was a really, really great intro, and really fascinating, your story. And it's really only just getting started as well. I can imagine, being able to work on some of those really high end, like really practical projects in businesses in the real world. I mean, that's just like the gold standard of experience of like what data can do, what automation, what process automation can do. So being able to see it being done for real and then being able to teach it, I think is that's a really exciting combination of things to be doing for sure, because you can actually vouch for, this is actually really happening out there. Like these tools are actually really making a difference, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing like real world life experience. And it's funny, like a lot of the problems that I see with people in terms of adopting these tools are problems that we kind of have to overcome when we're deploying these engagements. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of how do you kind of tailor the content towards them? How do you kind of encourage them to use it and all of that? But I would say in general, I think people who can kind of leverage these tools are going to be the ones who rise up in their organizations the quickest. I mean, it's one of those things where if you use Power Automate to do something that someone doesn't know Power Automate exists, it looks like magic to them, right? It's kind of like how when you would show really, really old school people how Excel works. So it's kind of like that next layer of software that people are learning to kind of get that edge, which is what I see.
Yeah, I mean, we 100% agree on that. I mean, if you can be like at a reasonable level or better in Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate, I mean, you can literally transform a business. There's like no doubt in my mind. I mean, you can analyze anything. You can create much more efficient processes in terms of like capturing data and capturing information, and then you can automate a whole range of things off the back of it. I mean, that's like what businesses are operationally. Like that is all of the moving parts within the business that actually make a difference in terms of time saving and value add, etc. Like if you can master these tools, I mean, there's no better opportunity to increase your value, but also become one of the most important people within an organization very, very quickly.
Yeah, no, definitely agreed with you there. Yeah.
And tell me about your Udemy experience. So from thinking about doing it and creating some content, how long did it take you to work out, okay, well, Udemy is a good place to go and do this? And did you identify, okay, there's a massive gap here because no one's created a good Power Apps course or a Power Automate course? Like how did the process work for you?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do something related to Power Platform. I remember seeing this like 3-circle chart when I was going, it's like an overlap chart, basically. When I was starting off with Udemy, you want to try to find a topic that you have expertise in, that there's a market gap in. And I forget what the other what the other chart was. I believe is something that that there's actually going to be a forward growth to it. So for Power Platform, it hit all of those 3 different things. In terms of just looking at what topics were available on Udemy, Udemy is one of those platforms that's kind of I would call it more of a flea market of courses. Anyone can publish on it. You don't have to be certified or anything like that. Because of that, there's a lot of content on a lot of topics. It's not specialized in any sort of sense. And because of that, there's also some content that's on there that probably shouldn't be on there. So in order to kind of differentiate yourself, you have to kind of produce good content to kind of like throw yourself away from the pack. So when I first started, there was a big following for Power BI, but not as big of a following for Power Apps, Power Automate. So just chose one of those 2 and started getting at it. So I started first with Power Apps. And when I first started too, I was a bit worried because the imposter syndrome kicked in. I don't have any certifications in Power Apps. I've used it in the field, but I'm not really no one's kind of assigned me that you are the Power Apps star or anything like that. So I did have a bit of imposter syndrome, but then that kind of goes through, especially because when you start developing courses, you kind of see that you look at other courses and you kind of see, okay, they clearly are doing this because they have the knowledge in it and because they're a good teacher. It's not really anything else. No one needs to license you for that. So
yeah,
those are some of the learnings I think I found from starting off with creating courses online.
Yeah, that's a good insight. I mean, just like one of my thoughts when you were going through that was it's actually very similar to across anything. Like I still presume that there's a lot of Power BI users out there, or just anyone who wants to think about making additional revenue or just sort of money on the side. They're thinking, oh, like everything's been done before, everything's been covered. And I would say that there is always opportunities popping up, right? Like there's always opportunities. There's so much new technology coming on stream all the time. Like there is and always will be, I think, opportunities to create the course on the next best technology or the next best idea. Like there's just so many things that are evolving. And even like the big platforms like Power BI, right? Like there's a lot of new things happening in Power BI and the Power Platform and in Azure. Like there's always new technologies. So there's always opportunities to create new content and create new resources that can add value to someone. So I think that's unique. That's a nice, unique insight that you found. Like, you had the experience in Power BI. It didn't require you to have some certification or anything. You just had experience. It was sort of as the wave was growing, rather than it was just starting with Power Apps, and you sort of jumped on board. And I think that's something that everyone out there can sort of look out for as well, for opportunities for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely always that opportunity where you look at the supply of something that's kind of not there yet, but the demand will be there, and if you get in early enough, then you kind of have that first mover wave advantage. But one thing that I found with Udemy that I didn't expect at all is these tertiary opportunities that get brought up. A lot of now, for example, I do a lot of now, Power Platform consulting in general. And a lot of these contracts that I get are people who've taken my course, or someone who's taken my course who's then recommended it to someone else. And you get a lot of good opportunities that way. This was at the beginning never, meant to be a career for me, but because of developing that content, because of those tertiary opportunities, it's something that, if I put more fuel to the fire, it might become that one day. So that's something that I see that, people really need to kind of grasp, as especially in things that are growing. There's the demand for really good Power Platform talent is far greater than the supply. And not just in terms of independent contracting, but also in people and organizations as well. So I definitely think that you can find a good hole for yourself if you kind of excel at those skills and learn those skills and develop them in the future. But yeah, no, that's one of the best things about putting content online. You start to build your brand, and then you get these random opportunities that you would have never gotten otherwise if you hadn't taken that first step.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the same with Power BI. Like there is far more demand than high quality Power BI developers even now. I mean, I would say that the gap is growing. Like there's just such a need out there. And the faster you, like as we mentioned earlier, the faster you can get better at these tools and become the expert in these tools, your value will skyrocket. It's no doubt in my mind. I'll tell you a story. My story of starting Enterprise DNA was actually very similar to the opportunity you saw on Udemy. Like Power BI was just emerging in its current form, and I knew that I was a big Excel user, and I just knew that some of these websites on Excel were big, right? Like people go to them all the time. I used to go to all of these websites all of the time. I used to go to YouTube videos all of the time about how to do Excel things. And a new technology came out, and I was like, well, look, everything's going to be exactly the same in 3, 5, 10 years with Power BI as it is with Excel. Like, because people are going to need to know how to do this stuff. They're going to need somewhere to go. They're going to have to find on things on Google, find things on YouTube. And so that's how, that was sort of my insight. It was like, those 3 circles you described, like it was exactly the same thing. Like I had some expertise. I identified this new opportunity. And I thought that it was going to be a sustainable opportunity, like it was going to last for quite some time. So it was sort of like very, very, very similar. But now Power BI is quite, it's different now. Like it's a different marketplace now. Like there's a lot of people there's a lot of people in the Power BI space and slowly Power App space that are a bit more entrenched now, and it's harder. It's harder to get noticed on YouTube, Udemy, websites, Google. Like you are up against it, so it's sort of looking for the next opportunity. I think I'm not discouraging anyone from competing against us, but I'm just saying that it's a lot hard. It is a lot harder now. Like you've probably got to identify. You've really got to identify the next thing, the next opportunity, which there will be. There's no doubt about it. No doubt in my mind.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think with Power BI too, right now, I mean, the adoption is really, really high. Like if you ask 10 executives, 9.5 of them will know something about Power BI. Whereas with Power Apps and Power Automate, you don't have that level at all. It's if I would estimate, it's more of a 2 out of 10. So it's one of those things where kind of Microsoft needs to kind of engage people the same way they did it for Power BI for these other platforms. One of the ways they've done that is they've made Power Automate Desktop an integrated application of Windows 11. So when you get Windows 11, you automatically have Power Automate Desktop. You then Google it. You can then find cool things to do. And hey, maybe you start using it after then. And then that's your entry into the Power Platform world. Yeah. But I think that's one of the biggest kind of challenges that I see in terms of the Power Platform in general. Power BI is great, but they kind of need to open doors and pull more people into Power Apps and Power Automate and virtual agents at some point as well.
Yeah. So what do you think Microsoft can do to make those tools that you just mentioned more attainable, get to the level of Power BI? Like what would you say Microsoft should do?
Yeah, I think one thing is just awareness. So for example, the move that they're doing with Power Automate, great move. They're also putting a lot of dollars into trying to basically have these types of workshops and open designs where they actually come into your organization and they teach you all of these Power Platform tools. And they're starting to do that for not for free, but for a very discounted price to kind of encourage and teach people all these platforms as well. I think Power Automate is something that will actually be more popular than Power Apps. Power Automate has a different use case, obviously, to Power Apps, but with Power Automate, I feel like everyone can use it, whereas Power Apps, you do need a specific use case for it. So I think Power Automate will kind of generally go up there, especially as more people look towards automation and in general, things like that. I think Power Apps, there needs to be kind of like a mind shift in an organization. With Power Apps, the whole point is that so you don't have, Excel files that are being opened up by different teams on OneDrive or something like that. Instead, you have customized user interface experiences so that people edit the things that they need to edit and they don't care about anything else. I think for that, there needs to be kind of, again, like a mind shift. And I'm not sure if Microsoft will be able to do that in the next, 1 to 2 or to 3 years. But I think service providers, perhaps like ourselves, can kind of show these tools to people and say, hey, you can create very good user interfaces for your data very, very quickly and kind of teach people that. One thing I've also found at the firms that that my company consults with is we always have champions. So we always assign people like a Power BI champion, Power Platform champion, Power Apps champion. So I think having someone in your organization that can be that person and get certified by Microsoft at this kind of price, I think that can also help too.
Yeah, nice. That was going to be my next question is, what are some of the success stories that you've seen within some of the businesses you're working with, particularly with, say, Power Apps and Power Automate, and what is it taking to make it a success story?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is to make it a success story is to kind of convince people to use it. It's one of those things where, for example, a company that I was doing, well, it was a government entity that I was doing consulting for. They basically certify transportation vehicles for use, and they wanted to kind of overhaul that process because they have a lot of stakeholders that affect everything, and the project managers have these big Excel files that they wanted to replace fully. And you know, I think the hardest thing for us was to get the adoption to a point where, hey, you shouldn't use Excel files, you should use this instead because of all these benefits. And communicating them was difficult at the beginning, but you just have to kind of keep pressing until you get your message across. I also think that one thing that helps with these Power Apps and Power Automate kind of sessions is to have someone who's who has expertise in it to kind of come in and help you with it. Power Apps is one of those things where it's easy to learn but difficult to master. I guess very similar to Power BI. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people will get kind of frustrated once they start using Power Apps and they want to do a semi-complex thing, and because there's not a lot of resources online yet for Power Apps, they Google it, they get confused by the Googling, it's hard for them to debug errors, so they kind of give up on it. So having someone come in and kind of help you, guide you through that process is, I think, also something that leads to success.
Yeah, right. And what are some of the things that could be done from a service perspective to speed up adoption of Power Apps and Power Automate? Like what I'm thinking is sort of templates or pre-built 80% pre-built apps or something like that. Do you feel like there's a big opportunity in the Power Apps and Power Automate space to provide some service or some products around that?
Yeah, so Power Automate has really good templates already. So if you go into Power Automate's website, for example, you have a series of templates. You just click it. For example, there's a template where whenever someone tweets you, you get an email. You click it, you basically put in your Twitter credentials, you put in your email credentials, and the flow is made for you. So Power Automate kind of has that going for itself. Power Apps has that less. I think what's very powerful that Power Apps does is if you have an Excel file that you're currently using, you can port that Excel file in and it will make an app for you in 2 minutes without you needing to do anything. An app that basically allows you to add records, modify records, delete records. So it's very powerful in that sense. So I'm not sure if there's any service things. I think it's more of an awareness problem than anything. Power Apps, what I like to say is, it's as easy as it's basically a combination of Excel and PowerPoint. You have an app, so you have a drag and drop type system like PowerPoint, and you have formulas that you use that are very similar to Excel. If you know PowerPoint, if you know Excel, Power Apps will be a breeze, but it does look intimidating at first when you start to use it, and you just have to kind of get across that hurdle and know about it to actually start using that. Power Automate, love Power Automate because it's so simple, and I think for that it's also just an awareness problem. But yeah, definitely templates that would help. Just in terms of getting awareness out there, I'm not just it's hard to say, but I guess I'm not sure what strategy they follow with Power BI, but I know visualization was very big at that time, and Power Apps and Power Automate does have some competitors, and obviously as competitors market, then they themselves get a tide increase as well. So I think that also helps too.
Right. And when you're dealing with customers, do you find any challenges in getting the requirements from their minds into an app that you're developing? Like, what is the process there? One thing that I know from experience is that it was always like when I was doing a little bit of consulting back in the early days of Enterprise DNA, it was getting the exact requirements out of someone's mind when they don't really know what they want, and then getting them into a model and then a working report designed in a way and telling a story like how they would want it. So what are some, like, have you seen similar challenges, and what are some strategies that you have pursued to make that process a little bit more optimized?
Oh yeah, so that's definitely product manager 101. I mean, you definitely won't have what you envision in the beginning won't be what you have at the end. So I think the most important thing, and also, these no code apps help with that, is to be agile in the sense that to build quickly, get it out there, see what feedback you have, and then recycle that. Because definitely even the requirements that people give you, even though that's what they think they want, it's not. So it's helpful to do that. I think that's one of the biggest benefits about using these no code platforms is that your iteration time is so quick that you don't, if there is a situation where you work on a feature that then never gets used or that they don't want anymore, you haven't wasted a week on it. You've maybe wasted an hour or 2 hours on it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the very powerful bit. It's one of those things too, where when I was, like when I'm in my consulting projects, it's difficult to get what the users have in their heads out. So it's more of a discussion on what their users need, and then you working with them to kind of workflow the solution rather than them giving the solution. One thing I found very quickly early on is, you don't ask people about what they want, you ask about people what they need and what their problems are. And then you kind of work through a solution together. Because the people you're talking to also don't know half the stuff that you can do in Power BI and Power Apps and Power Automate, right? They don't know, for example, that with your Power BI report, you can add in a Power App on top of it to add functionality to it. So if you only ask them for their solution, they're not going to give you it. They're not going to say that. But if you ask them what their problems are and what they want to do, then you can suggest these types of features that they can then have in their mind, and then you can kind of work through a solution together. So that's something that I've seen. But yeah, the biggest thing is no code platforms are very agile, and that is so key when you're developing something.
Yeah, really good points there. I love the iterative approach. Like I think that is so true with these tools. Is don't get too caught up in producing the perfect solution like straight away. Just build something fast and efficiently, and then get it out there, and then get feedback and iterate. That's what's so good about, particularly Power BI is an amazing tool for that. Like it's so easy to create a report and then just make adjustments to the visualizations in under an hour. Like it is that easy.
One thing I will say about Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate, and I hope Microsoft does this over the next few years, is that it's very hard to version control them. So it's hard to kind of build. Power Apps and Power Automate does have some sort of this, like basically co-building, but it is hard to co-build things and like track version control systems and stuff like that. So I hope Microsoft, if you're watching, I hope one day they kind of bring in version control systems into all of these types of platforms.
Yeah, kind of like DevOps, right? Like you would be developing a web application, and people commit things to GitHub, and there's a whole process around it, right? There's really nothing like that, even though we're building applications. Like I always say with Power BI, we're building reporting applications, and the same with Power Apps, you're building apps. Same with like if you're building a mobile app, you would have there's a process, there's a DevOps process around that, and there isn't so much. I totally agree. Totally agree. Maybe they felt that doing that too early in the Power BI game or the Power Platform game would scare too many people off or something. It would scare the Excel user off. Like there's probably some strategy behind it from a marketing perspective. Maybe it will be a feature. I do know they've released some amazing announcement today at time of recording here around something like a data mart in Power BI. Like it's something quite transformational. So I think that's something sort of like from my initial understanding, it's some sort of data layer within the Power BI experience for a particular workspace. So I think that will be quite, and that could be across all Power Platform as well, which could be quite exciting. But that data architecture piece, I think, has not been, there's still too much ambiguity, and there has been for years around the entire Power Platform, right? It's like, how does anyone know whether they should be having data in Azure or SharePoint or leave it in Excel or in their SaaS-based applications or in the common data model. There's just like so many variations of like what you could do. And I think it needs to be simplified. It just needs to be much easier. And so maybe that's the start of them doing that. And I'm sure they've got that feedback from more than just us.
Oh yeah, I've definitely given them a lot of feedback on Dataverse. So that it used to be called the Common Data Model. Now it's called the Dataverse. But it was supposed to kind of solve that problem where you have a lot of these different data sources that go into Dataverse, and then you have up from Dataverse your apps, your reporting, everything that you need. And right now, it's definitely not had that level of adoption. And I think a lot of adoption that it has had is people who used to use Microsoft or they still use Dynamics 365. For them, it's very easy for them to port over to Dataverse, same architecture, same kind of structure. But it just could be so much more if they, fix a few things here and there. Which I don't know. So like the previous consulting contract that I was on was helping them set up that Dataverse because they wanted to use model-driven apps. And in order to use model-driven apps, you need to have your data in Dataverse.
Right.
So we kind of went through this whole structure before we even started developing the model-driven app is how do you, what sort of schema do you have in Dataverse? How are the tables related together? And that's more of a data engineering exercise that people don't consider when you kind of build these apps. You need to have a data layer beneath it, and you kind of need to think about how these different pieces of information interact together.
Yeah. There's so much that needs to be done to just make that like seamless, because there's a lot of selling around no code like front ends, but there's not. I don't think that the reality is there's not a lot of no code like back ends, right? Like there's that data layer. I think there's a lot of businesses trying to solve it out there, but they're not Microsoft specific from what I can tell. Like they're sort of more generalist. They're sort of like connection tools, like data pipeline connection tools. But it would be nice if it was just far more seamless, right? Like one click, like you didn't have to know how to use Azure. You didn't have to know how to use an API. Like it just was, far easier. So even an Excel user could whip something out. Like I think, look, I have no doubt that is, there's wherever there's an opportunity like that, someone's going to target it. So I have no doubt that that's going to happen. And that's actually what the big trend I've talked about this with many of the podcast guests is, automation up and down the stack, up and down development. It's just, it's just getting more and more and more. And I think that's the real future, right? Is the future of all of this is it's just going to be automated more. Like it's just going to everything from being able to analyze things like almost automatically, like automatically creating dashboards and reports to automatically creating apps, being able to maybe like verbalize an automation and getting most of it built for you. And then things far down the stack as well around data architecture, et cetera, as well.
Yeah, definitely. Perhaps this is a synonym to automation, but like there's a trend of both automation and like accessibility via no code and low code for everything in the pipeline. So you used to think about, just like simple things like data science and things like that. Right now, there are so many no code platforms that you can use to actually perform very complex data science algorithms that you didn't have before. Mm-hmm. We just talked about application development. We just talked about Power Automate, being able to automate scripts. You can now do that with no code and it's accessible to everyone. Now it's also with data engineering too. So you have things like, Azure Data Factory, which has been around for a while, but that's very easy for someone to use to kind of create a design interface similar to what you would do in Power Automate, where you have a database here, you connect them together to do a left join. You don't need to write SQL code and, specify things like that and work with partitions. It's done with user interface. So, right. I think it's that 85% rule, right? Like 85% right now, 90% in the future, it's going to become more and more no code. Now, whenever I say that to people are always like, oh, why am I going to CS? Why am I doing all this kind of things? There will obviously always be that sort of like, that's something else. It's more so giving power to, people who don't know how to code. Now they can do all these new things that can, at the end of the day, like kind of provide value for their organization. And again, those are the people that will rise up, right? Because now you have someone who can kind of build a data engineering pipeline in 6 hours rather than having like 2 weeks of a developer's time who kind of is specialized at that task, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I agree with the trend there, and there's going to be something else that's going to be like no coded and automated that we can't even think of right now. But yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Couple of final questions from me. Earlier you mentioned, and I'm really fascinated to learn a bit more about some of the challenges and success stories around the big projects, the analytics projects that you were talking about. Like, the example you gave was how some of the retail stores were almost analyzing the way that people moved through their store. Like this is some analysis that was probably very difficult to do even a few years ago, but now being opened up across any number of industries. How did you approach that type of project, and what were some of the nuances to managing it and also building something that held some value in that project?
Yeah, definitely. So, the types of projects I was working on was, it's particular to the data source you're talking about, was being able to take a look at if a retailer promoted something, if it was a good promotion or not.
Yep. Was
the lift enough to kind of compensate for the decrease in unit price that you were getting for that? And for these types of problems, you need to calculate a baseline. And that itself is a whole nother discussion of how you calculate an accurate baseline. What do you look at? What kind of factors do you use? When calculating a baseline, there's many different tiers. The first is you just look at what happened last year when the item wasn't promoted. And that itself has a whole host of problems because compared to last year, your number of stores might have changed. There might have been a trend, decrease or increase. For example, if you use things like printing services, you can't assume that your baseline is whatever you had last year, because printing services just have a negative trend in general. So your promotions will just look bad then. Mm-hmm. So then you have that as the first tier. The next tier that you have is looking at things like this trend and seasonality and holidays, and trying to factor those types of things into your baseline. So that itself is something that's going on right now. One thing that we tried to do is also factor in externalities. So things like, for example, weather. So weather really impacts if you're going to go shopping that day, especially if we're talking about brick and mortar stores. So that's something that also we're trying to bring in. In terms of store traffic, we're trying to look at if people are passing through aisles and the speed which they're going, because that kind of tells you what type of shop they're doing. Are they doing a regular 2-hour grocery shop, or are they quickly going through and kind of finding the items that they want and just doing that? In particular to that piece of data, we were using that to classify shoppers. So it's very beneficial for retailers to classify shoppers because that dictates the types of discounts and personalized coupons that they receive. If you're the type of shopper that goes consistently in every week, you go to the same sort of aisles, you pick up the same sort of stuff, then you'll get a different set of coupons, because what retailers want to do there is they want to expand your basket. They want you to buy things that you wouldn't regularly buy. So they're not going to give you discounts on things you always buy, because for them, that wouldn't be a good, profit case. Instead, they're going to give you discounts on aisles they know you pass through that are not part of your basket, that kind of expand your basket. And then they're hoping that after they do that 2 or 3 times, that you continue to purchase that item, and that's how you get that return.
Mm-hmm. Question on because that can be like, that sounds really complex, right? And I'm sure could overwhelm some people. So how are you like literally building the data model to facilitate that type of analysis? Because I think that's sort of like stage one here, right? It's like all that analysis is great and can be achieved in isolation. But when you start combining all of these different factors, like how does your data model look to be able to achieve that?
Yeah, so we're using distributed clusters over here. So our data model is so big that we can't just use one database. It's parallel programming and all of that kind of stuff. But in terms of the actual schema, we have a standard transaction log that all retailers have that tells you what customer, when they came to the store, what they bought. We then have another data source that kind of tells us for that customer, because we can ID them, what kind of aisles they went through, because your phone has a Wi-Fi connector that kind of tells you that we can link to. So we have another table that kind of has the matching between a customer ID per se, using their credit card information, and their Wi-Fi phone. So you can do it that way. And after you get all these tables together, then I could go into the analysis, but that's a whole nother podcast. But again, setting up that model is probably 80% of the work that we do to try to get that into a good state. Because there's obviously, it's one of those things where you need to have that data at the 90 to 95% range of accuracy. If you have any less, then the insights that you get from it can be tarnished, and you don't want to go through that. I think one of the biggest challenges was so before this project, I had never used cluster computing before or anything like that. So we actually had to learn Databricks, learn that platform. We then started using PySpark instead of our regular Python pandas, because you had to use some sort of cluster computing software like Spark to actually do all these types of things. Again, that's the data model. After the data model, you get your insights. You then roll it up to a level that can be consumed within Power BI and Power Apps and Power Automate. And that's its own problem as well, because then you have a pipeline that goes through this big data warehouse that you have that has all this analysis to something that's rolled up that Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate can actually handle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's super fascinating. Is there any tips from your experience in this particular instance that you could give just to say, in any business around making that type of analysis as scalable as possible?
Yeah, I think one thing that really helped me at the beginning is to, you need a good foundation when you do any of these problems. So learn SQL, and it's one of those things where you can go to YouTube and find a SQL course for 2 hours, but that's not going to be enough for you to kind of grasp how, just data engineering concepts. So learn SQL and then try to apply it. Try to create a pipeline where you have two different data sources that come together, and try to optimize that. I think that's one thing that really helped. When you look at any sort of data science or analytics and stuff like that, the one thing that people go to is it's just data engineering plus. A lot of their work is data engineering at the end of the day. So having a good foundation there is very important. In terms of cluster computing and things like that, that's its own whole specialized thing. I think for that, you don't need to know how it works really, but you can just have a general concept of what a master slave node is, for example, and things like that, and you should be able to get by. But in terms of the actual joining two tables together, data engineering, stuff like that I feel like you need a good foundation for you to keep going and doing these types of analytics at scale. Yeah.
Nice. No, there's some good ideas, some good tips that you've learned at the coalface of how these projects actually happen. It's really really good stuff. Okay, well, look, I think we've covered more than enough. We've covered some good stuff today. So really appreciate your time, Henry, and thanks for coming on with me, and thanks everyone for tuning in to the Analytic Mind podcast. We've had some really top guests lately, so this particular session had a whole lot of gold nuggets for sure around how to actually practically implement a lot of these technologies. So thanks for sharing, Henry, and thanks for sharing your story as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. And if you want to check out more of Henry's courses and content, there's obviously some on Udemy, but there's also some on Enterprise DNA's platform as well. Some really good courses that are going to enable you to learn how to build enterprise apps with all of these tools in the Power Platform. So definitely recommend checking those out.
Yeah, and definitely check out the Enterprise DNA YouTube channel. I think my most recent video I was recording was actually on creating a chatbot, and we create one in 5 minutes using Power Virtual Agents, which I think is going to be another big thing. That's really, really cool. It kind of gives you a good grasp as to this no code kind of revolution that we've been talking about this entire podcast.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's exciting that even the Power Platform is seeing some growth and additional toolings and technologies that are coming into it as well, which I'm sure is just the start. It's a big brand. It's a big area of Microsoft that they're going to want to continue to expand upon for sure. So yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm excited to learn a bit more about virtual agents myself.
Awesome. Great.
Cool. Thanks, Henry. Let's wrap it up.